type of thing. So today I have Maestro, conductor, composer, pianist Marlon Daniel. Hello, Marlon. It's so great to be able to speak with you today.
Hello, Carolyn. How are you doing today?
All is well. All is well. The world is still here. It's We had some bad news today. Today's the day after Easter, and
hmm
I woke up to hear that the Pope Francis had passed away. But for those people of faith, he is with the Lord now, and
Yes,
so
I
we
heard
just
that
pray
too.
for his soul. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, as a Protestant, there's a history between Protestants and Catholics, but we're people of faith, and so we pray for his soul. Anyway, to
Well, I
the
actually am a
task at
Catholic,
hand.
and I've been an
Aha.
altar boy in the whole 9 yards. So
Okay.
that was very shocking today because it was all of a sudden. And it is what it is, and let's see what what God has in store for us next.
Exactly. Now, I want to say first of all, when I first met you, and it was quite a while ago, I thought you were from France. How did I make that connection?
Probably
Was it
because
because of
living in France.
Guadeloupe, or you were coming from France at the time? Can you just tell me about that? Do you remember when we first met? It was in the park
Yes.
up at the Harlem Mirror.
It was. Wow, you have a clear memory, and I probably was living in France at the time and at Guadeloupe, so it's probably a combination of the two. I'm not exactly sure what year it was, but it had to be one of the earlier years that I had founded the Festival International de Musique Saint Georges, which was a big thing for France, and especially France in the Outremer or the Caribbean islands that are French.
Well, you have to remind people that Guadeloupe is a department of France, correct?
Correct. Guadeloupe
Yeah.
is a department of France, and it's been there ever since the 18th century, 1700s,
Mm.
and it was actually once called. All of these islands was called the Americas, and this was in all of the European um, countries actually had islands that they were responsible for. Islands in France's case that they actually were in the, let's put it, the human slavery business, and basically they had laws that they didn't do that in their own country, so they found a loophole, and the loophole were the Caribbean islands.
Hmm. But as Hawaii is to the United States, for people
Mhm.
that don't understand that, then Guadeloupe is to France. So
Yes,
actually, the people who are in Guadeloupe are French citizens, correct?
they are.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Now, how
Like
did you
Puerto
get to,
Rico also, I guess, in some way.
Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens? Yes.
Mhm.
So how did you get to Guadeloupe?
I had an interest in Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint George, and I had a friend who was at working for the French government tourism, and they told me about this wonderful composer and innovator, Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint George, of which I didn't really believe them. They were like a person of color of African descent, influenced Mozart, and did all these wonderful things. And I had been studying music all my life and in conservatory at the time at Manhattan School of Music, and had never heard of this person. And so they opened my eyes to this person. I start to find out more and more and more. And I guess now I'm considered one of the foremost authorities on Joseph Boulogne Chevalier de Saint George.
Did you go to the Bibliothèque Nationale or in Paris, or
I've
did
been
you
there
find more about it here in the United States?
mostly a lot of things here, but yes, I do have my Biblio Nacional card, and I did some research there at some points. I still do. Actually, I was just there last summer,
Hmm.
and they have many of his works, but they're a little bit spread out. They're like one or two works here, one or two works there, which actually baffles me that France has not taken it upon themselves to be a champion of this composer who has brought so much to France and actually kind of proves in a way that France was a very big power in classical music, especially in the 18th century, which they give all the credit to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, like Alberti basses and how he treats the strings and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe because of the French Revolution, they gave all of that away, and Marie Antoinette was, she was in France. If you wanted to make it, you should be in France at this time. And that's why Mozart came there for his second time outside of being a prodigy. And he came there to make his name for himself. But unfortunately, he was not as in fashion as he thought he was because the big name and the celebrity composer of the day was Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint George.
Can we back up a little bit? Because I heard a story that the Three Musketeers, there's some relationship between Bologna, Alexandre Dumas, the
Yes.
Three Musketeers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, Dumas' father, Alexander Dumas Sr., he was actually in the Legion of Saint George, which is the all-black military unit that was fighting for France in the time of the French Revolution. And a lot of those things and exploits that Saint George had is there seems to be a direct correlation between what he did and who he was, got put into the pages of Alexander Dumas' Three Musketeers, and even his father's life in like the Count of Monte Cristo and things like that. And so basically, he didn't look far for his inspiration, but never the credit was given.
So let me back up just a little bit. The grandfather, Chevalier de Saint George, and the
Mhm.
grandfather of
Father.
the father of Alexandre Dumas,
Hmm.
Alexandre Dumas fils, no, père, the father,
Yes, the
because
pair.
there's père and fils.
Hmm.
And so the one who wrote the Three Musketeers, his
Exactly.
father was with Saint George.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
It was and they have a book called The Black Count that outlines his father, Alexander Dumas, the writer's father, um, pretty much escapades and basically his time with Joseph Boulogne. And it
Oh,
was quite in revealing because he went through. They found these letters that the author that were in some maison or chateau in
mm-hmm.
France that had descriptions of what they did and of course of Joseph Boulogne and things like that. And some of those things, all of his adventures, got totally lifted from the pages of his life into the pages of Alexander Dumas books. They
Well, I
always say
have
that one of the characters in the Three Musketeers, I might be wrong about it being D'Artagnan, but a lot of that was lifted from his life to those pages.
well now, Maestro. I have to say, I saw a painting of Joseph Bologna that's from the National Gallery,
Mhm.
Portrait Gallery in England, and he was a fine brother. Okay.
Well, that was his other nickname besides being, as people wanted to, make things easier for themselves to wrap their head around a very educated and very talented black man. He was also called the Don Juan of his day, too.
Oh dear.
But yeah, that was one of they want to nickname it because he had quite a way with the ladies at the time. And so he was known for not only being a great fencer, a great musician, but also a great lover, I believe.
Hmm. Well, I could see from his painting how one might succumb, as I must say. So, just getting back to Dumas very quickly, I was sitting in my class. It was opera literature and opera,
Mm.
literature in opera. And I did not know that Dumas was of African descent.
Ha ha
And
ha.
my teacher, my professor at the time, Dr. Robert K. Evans at University of Cincinnati, he just leaned over and he was talking about Dumas and La Traviata, which is by
Hmm.
the Dumas fils, the son.
Hmm.
And he says, and he was black. And
Hmm.
I was like, what?
Yeah, yeah.
and
These are
and he
hidden.
talked about Pushkin as well. And
Exactly. Pushkin
and
also.
and we can use this to say to people, we have always been there. So getting back to Bologna, talk about his music, his vocal works, of course, of which I am interested because I'm a singer, but also his orchestral works and the festival that you just had earlier this year in at Rutgers University.
Well, the where should I start? There's so much to talk about. Where should we start? Which one of your questions should I answer first?
Let's start at the very beginning. You could start with the festival because I attended and I was just blown away by the level, the variety, the different composers. You had women composers represented, but also this big symphony that you had of his that was done.
Well, the symphonies basically that's he wrote two symphonies. One of them, the one you've heard, which was the first one in G major, and the second one, which also like Mozart, they used in their operas and things like that. So he also used the second symphony in his opera, The Anonymous Lover, which is his only surviving opera. These pieces are just like symphonies that have been written by Haydn or Mozart at the time, and they are lovely. They are, when played right, they have a special place in people's heart, and people, they as much as one wants to, or some want to diminish his ingenuity and his creativity, it is quite evident in these pieces.
Well, they often call him the Black Mozart, but actually he preceded Mozart. No.
Yes, he did, and that's one of those things that uh, I feel and many feel that was a way to um, make him smaller or his value diminished in some way. And of course, yes, he was before Mozart. So, and a lot of people always say, and we always joke about it, that Mozart actually was the white Saint George.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello. Well, timeline would actually, and his popularity would actually, would support that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then it's not to take anything away from Mozart. Mozart was a supreme genius, but to not give credit where credit is due is a slight, I think, in the greatest sense of the word. That he did many things and helped so many composers at the time that it was worth more than sometimes a footnote in a music history book. Definitely worth more. I mean, he commissioned the Haydn symphonies. Mozart copied his style in such a way that he, for his Paris Symphony and things like that, he basically said in his writings that he adapted the second movement to be more in the French style. What was the
Hmm.
French style at that time? Who was the dominant composer at that time? It was Joseph Bologna,
Well,
Chevalier de Saint-Georges.
how did he disappear? It's a testament to the value and the importance of research that
Mhm.
you and other people have resurrected this man's work. Because I know when I was coming through conservatory, I'd never heard of him.
Yeah.
Um, how is it that he disappeared? I read something about the revolution and which side he was on, and this kind of thing.
Well, I think a lot of factors. For me, the main factor was the French Revolution. He was actually, he fought for the people because he had to fight for the people. He was the people because of the Côte Noir and slavery and things like that.
Hmm.
He didn't have the same rights as everybody else because him being a mulatto, as they would say it at that time, and sometime even this time in the islands, um, but he didn't have the same rights. He couldn't marry. He couldn't succeed like his father with, like being endowed with like the plantations and things like that, in Guadeloupe and all the dealings that he had in France. And so he was like, a secondhand son in all but name because lucky for him, his father loved him and supported him and did the best he could for him and took precautions to actually make him have the best life he possibly could.
Hmm.
So that was a factor, but I believe the French Revolution really played a big part, and Napoleon, because Paris, reign of terror. They were burning everybody and cutting the heads off of everyone at that time. And so he barely escaped the guillotine. And I think that basically when they burned everything, they didn't want to have anything to do, with this, it was the age of enlightenment. Any of these people who disagreed with them, kind of like today, with the books and things like that, anything that they didn't want you to read, anything that anybody who they didn't want you to know about. They ritualistically burn this stuff. As they burn your castle and cut off your head, they would burn everything. And I think a lot of his works that were popular were in these libraries of private dukes and
Mm.
royalty, and who supported him and they loved the arts and things like that. I think a lot of it was burned. And that was with just the reign of terror itself. Now, it didn't help either that Napoleon really, they are like, Napoleon helped. Everyone says, I haven't found any real proof of that, but because I haven't gotten around to it yet. But Napoleon he didn't like the fact that, he had this handsome, charismatic person that was, you know, around at the same time. This is a person that had all the reason to oppose him, so I'm sure he thought of that also, like, and so that's how the actual Legion de San George was kind of formed, and it's like, well, let's send them to impossible tasks that they couldn't complete and hopefully kill them all. But they
Mm.
succeeded, task after task that they were, that they were given, and that did not bode well, I'm sure, with Napoleon, because it's like, I thought I sent them to their death. Oh, they're back again and strong as ever. And the leadership that Joseph Boulogne showed was something that what I think is a threat when you want to become a dictator.
Well, it's interesting because you're speaking about his work in the army, in the military, was something I'd not heard about before, really.
Mhm.
Um, Very interesting story, very interesting character. I hope that there's another movie that comes out because I saw the movie last year, I believe it was, and I felt it was incomplete in so many ways. Now, I would like to talk about your time in Europe because oftentimes we as African Americans have to go abroad to cut our teeth, so to speak, to hone our talent and even get educated. When did you go to Europe for a long stay?
I believe I went to Europe for a long stay. Was it 2016, perhaps?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but I stayed there. I went to Prague first, and I studied at the Prague Academy, Prague Conservatory, and the Prague Academy, of which I have postgraduate diplomas from. And then I did a stint in Finland with Jorma Panola, the maker of maestros, and he's the same teacher as Klaus Makila, Esa-Pekka Salonen, Osam Vanska. All of the Finnish people have studied with Jorma Panola.
That's quite a lineage.
It is Susanna Malki, all of them.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'd be more famous if I was Finnish. But there's one little factor that separates me from all of the rest of those wonderful conductors.
What might that possibly
Ah,
be that you're an
yeah,
American?
what what might that be, you might ask?
But I
Um,
remember from your conference that there is an American connection with those conductors. Why don't you say
yeah.
that name for us?
So I'm gonna say the name, and the name is Dean Dixon.
Tell us about Dean Dixon.
Dean Dixon is I would say, the patron saint of, or should be the patron saint of all black conductors. Dean Dixon was a wonderful conductor, who was, I believe, in the 50s and even a little bit early, who was just a wonderful conductor. He tried to make a career here in the United States, and because of racism, he was not allowed. His last straw was he gave a great concert at Carnegie Hall with what was then the formation, I believe, of the New York Philharmonic. And they basically said that it was a sparsely attended concert, and it wasn't very good, which was absolutely the contrary. The concert was so packed people couldn't get in, and so delightful that people kept asking encore after encore for the orchestra, which is highly unusual.
Okay, okay, hang on one second. recently, there is a production of Othello on
Mhm,
Broadway, Shakespeare, with
mhm.
Denzel Washington, and the
Yes.
review came out and basically panned it.
Yes, I heard about the review. I did not see the production.
I met someone yesterday at dinner who attended and said it was absolutely fabulous.
Mm.
And so, what is the motivation of critics when they do that? I mean, it's
Well, I don't
they're
know the
entitled to
motivation
their
for Othello,
opinion.
but I
Hmm.
do know the motivation of the Dean Dixon, and that was because it was America, and and white America, especially composers and artists of the time, feared a lot what black artists were bringing to the table and the
Mm.
popularity of them, and they felt that they had to morally oppose this. And Dean Dixon was really like the brunt of a lot of people's ear because the just like ballet and all those things, wasn't meant for black people because we weren't smart enough, we weren't intelligent enough, we didn't have the right bodies, we didn't all the things that they could think of that were inherently racist, they put up there, and so he was the victim of a lot of that. So he left and went to Europe, like
Where did he go first?
he went to Scandinavia. In Germany, he went to Germany also. I don't know which one he went to first,
Hmm.
but he went there and he made a huge name for himself, and was hailed as a really great conductor. Germany, in fact, in Frankfurt, they have like archives with many concerts with Dean Dixon and broadcasts with him, and they actually did a documentary on him that was just wonderful.
Now,
And
Marlon, did he go before or after the Second World War?
I believe it was after the Second
Uh
World
huh.
War.
Uh-huh.
So
So this is a
yeah.
lineage that you come from.
Well, yeah, that's what I was trying to get to is that a Yoruba panel of the so-called maker of maestros who produced many of the people who have jobs today who are the greatest conductors of our day. So with Yorma Panala. When I met Yorma Panala, he took me aside and sat me down. And the first thing he asked me, when I first met him was at the master class, he says, "Hey, do you know of Dean Dixon?" And I thought that was a strange question coming from someone. I'm like, well, of course I know Dean Dixon. He was like the patron saint of all black conductors, and he's like a hero for us all. And he said, and he smiled. He says, "My teacher was Dean Dixon." Talk about mind being blown. Because the main reason I went to Europe is because, whenever they go out to pick a conductor for a major symphony, they go running to Europe to find a white man, a white conductor, who they bestow upon him all of the the fruits and the blessings, and they pipe them up. And I thought for many times, because I was brought up by my grandmother, said, "You work hard, and you're gonna get somewhere. You work hard. You have to work hard to get there." But
Yeah.
I was working hard, but I wasn't getting there. So I thought, well, maybe I'm not working. Maybe I don't have the right lineage or the right education. And I thought of it more of an educational thing. So I'm going to find out what they know to make myself or put myself on the same playing field as them. And that's exactly what I did when I went to Prague and studied there. I studied with Jiří Belalavik, who was the greatest Czech conductor, and then Yorma Panela. I'm like, well, I'm going to be ready now because all these people, I have the lineage now. But as you say, that I was missing that one factor that eluded me. The one factor, was, I believe, the color of my skin, and still to this day, I believe is the color of my skin, and many other conductors. I think that's why we don't have a conductor of color in a major orchestra or opera company in America, especially. And so I think that's the missing ingredient is
Hmm.
the white ingredient.
Well, I think I remember Jesse Norman saying, "I go where they hire me."
Hmm.
And you have done that.
Yes.
You started the festival in Guadeloupe.
Mhm.
You are on faculty at the Munster Conservatoire in Germany. Is that
Yes,
correct?
the Hochschule Münster.
Hochschule. Und das
Yes,
sprechen Sie
Hochschule.
Deutsch. the Hochschule. And
Mm.
you're also in Havana, Cuba, which is quite rare because there was an embargo for so long. Can you speak on the circle of the things that you're doing at each of those organizations? Well, we spoke about Guadeloupe a little bit, but talk about the Munster and Havana.
Well, I was talking about Havana first because I went there first, and I got there because once President Obama went there, when Michelle and Barack Obama went to Cuba, and things were looking much better for Cuba, like they were going to lift the embargo and things like that. And soon after, Beyonce and Jay Z went there, and I'm like, I have to figure out how to get there because you have another island full of people of color, and I wanted to figure out how to get there and how to do that. And I knew somebody from Cuba dealing in the Bahamas, and I couldn't figure it out. I written almost everybody I possibly could under the sun about going there, and because they have a symphony orchestra, the National Symphony. And finally, I talked to somebody in the Bahamas who I had worked. So I was working with the orchestra, workshop there, and which I was the head of. And one of the teachers was from Cuba, and I said, "I've tried everything." He said, "You should go to Cuba." I'm like, "I've been trying," and he picks up his phone and calls the director of the National Symphony, Maestro Mesa, and says, "Hey, I got this guy. He's really wonderful, and can you get him to Cuba?" I had an invitation within 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then I went there, and then I became the first African American, and so far the only African American in their 65 now year history to perform with and being invited to perform with the National Symphony Orchestra.
What do you think of the musicians there?
The musicians of the National Symphony at the time were really, really wonderful. And they have that old school mentality. Here, you know, people don't want to rehearse. They don't want to practice. They want to just show up. So they're dealing with the same playbook. And a lot of the symphonies these days, they all sound the same. We've been trained to a high level of doing exactly what's on the playbook. So anything different, is not necessarily welcomed. For
Mhm.
instance, if you listen to recording from the older days, you can tell what Toscanini or sounded like, or Reiner. You could tell by their personalities coming through the orchestra. These days,
I've heard that. Yeah.
not so much. You can play any recording, a lot of recordings, and you don't know who they are or who is conducting them, and that's because it's sometimes not welcome. A good friend of mine who was an associate at a major symphony. Um, she had all these great ideas, and she came to rehearsal and she started to implement these ideas, and at the break she was told not to, that basically they didn't want to hear her ideas. They just wanted her to stand up there and wave the stick,
Keep time.
keep time. They know
Hmm.
what they're doing, and and so it's very, very difficult to do something that's outside the normal or do something that's more reflecting your personality.
So
Uh,
with the Cuban orchestra, you found that different. Do you
exactly.
also find that with student orchestras because they're young and
Yes.
they haven't gotten the imprint of
Exactly.
or they're jaded? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I've played Beethoven's ninth,
Yes. That's what that you find a lot.
200 times.
200 times, and you're not going to come here and tell me how to do it.
So it's
Um,
not just a thing of nationality. Sometimes it's a thing of
no,
age,
I think
maybe as well.
age, and as you say, they become jaded. This is how we're doing it. It takes too much effort to untrain or do something different, and so most people will just do that. So it's always a pleasure to work with an orchestra that's willing to change.
Yeah,
And the National Symphony was one of those orchestras, and also the Lyceum Orchestra, which I think is one of the great orchestras in Cuba, the Havana Lyceum Orchestra.
that's a school.
No, it's not a school. It started off as a school orchestra
Uh
where
huh.
the best students from the ISA, which is the Academy for the Arts, the University of the Arts, formed an orchestra. And basically, it was the best of them. They actually suppressed the National Symphony with their virtuosity and things like that and musicality. But I found that after you give like a rehearsal, which I never find in America, and I seldom find in Europe, they were actually practicing. They were actually they had their own little section, like, "Let's go over that." "Oh, yeah, I see how," and then they have questions for you, like, "Did you mean," not in a jaded way, but, "Did you mean this or that? And did you prefer that the way we're doing it? Because we just went over that."
Hmm.
And it's just absolutely refreshing to have that kind of collaboration.
Well, Marlon, do you think part of that may come from the isolation that the country has been under for so
Of
many
course.
years? You know,
Yes, of course.
when I was in Rome, we did Aida, and the dance company was from Cuba.
Mhm,
And I'm not sure if they were expats. I know they hadn't come directly from the country, but they may have been expats living in Rome at the time. But they had their own dance company,
mhm.
and you know, as we communicate as artists, it's refreshing, it's also stimulating. We're able to bounce ideas off of each other, and that's the wonderful thing about creativity. um, I wanted to ask you as well, did you find the same with the students at the in Munster?
Yes, I did. You always find that if so, as I say, the jaded factor hasn't set in yet.
Mm.
And Münster was very flexible, and they really, for the last concert we did, they were really quite flexible, and they really were very interested in what one had to say, and they liked me. But an orchestra also has to like you to do anything, and in the first 5 minutes, they decide whatever they are, the collective decides whether they like you or not, and how much they're going to do for you. you know.
Well, I have to say, having observed, you know, you in Camden at the Rutgers Festival, was a festival Mahogany, I think.
Yes,
Did I say that correctly?
yes, Mahoney.
It seemed to me that the orchestra really liked you,
They did.
and the work that you did. I'd never heard Lily Boulanger, the sister of Nadia Boulanger, was a composer, and so it was all of this discovery of repertoire and things. So, can you speak about your festival there, which just happened at the end of February, beginning of March, and then I want to ask you some about the nuts and bolts of being a conductor.
Well, the festival in Camden, which is right outside of Philadelphia, is a special place. The Symphony in C is there, and that's the orchestra that was in residence. And it was really, really, really wonderful being with them because they are a training orchestra for. So basically, they leave there and they go to like the Philadelphia Orchestra, or they go to the Chicago Symphony, wherever they can find a job. So they're quite flexible, and the festival itself was. It's the I created that one also being a bit of an entrepreneur. Um, I created that as a sister festival, an American festival that's in line with the festival in Guadeloupe. So I've tried, that before here, and always there's something that goes askew in America.
But it
Try
didn't go askew this time,
No, because
right?
I made sure that I learned a little bit from my lessons, or enough from my lessons, to make sure that I was the person who was driving the bus, as they still say.
Let me just throw this in too, because a lot of times when people hear mahogany or ebony or black or whatever, they
Hmm.
think that it's exclusively black repertoire and black performers. And
Hmm.
that's not what it was. um, your festival was a mixture of performers and composers, very eclectic in a way, because as I said before, you had Bologna, and then you had some African American composers, then you had Cuban. Tanya Leon was
Hmm.
actually there to for the presentation of one of her
Hmm.
works, and then you had, as I said, Boulanger, these French composers, and then
Hmm.
you ended with Dvorak, was it not?
Yes, the Night
Yeah.
Symphony.
So we had this cornucopia of music and art
Hmm.
and nationalities, all for the sake and the joy of music. And I think that's important that we drive home that fact, because we're um, we're at a time where we have to understand that we're all in this together as artists.
Yes.
And your I don't want to use the word ecumenical, but it was kind of ecumenical. You know, it's like everybody, we have this big tent, come in and let's make music. And it just seemed to me for the festival, because I was there for all three days, that everyone was their energy was just high on the music making.
Yes, that's what
And that comes from you.
I try to focus on that. This is one of my things, and it's not even though the name is mahogany, mahogany pretty much is so many hues of where it's taken from of this wood, and so much versatility in the wood, and that's where I took it from. Unless I would have called it something else. I wanted to show that variety, not just black composers, not just white composers, not just men composers, um, but a variety, women composers, everybody, and music as a catalyst to show all of these people and how they can coexist together on one program, on one festival, on one event that lasted like a whole weekend and show this. And that's what I try to do even with the Festival San George. It's not a festival in Guadeloupe of just the music of Joseph Boulogne Chevalier de Saint George. It's a festival inspired by him, in tribute to him, and I think that that's what he wanted. Unless he wouldn't have commissioned the Haydn symphonies and done all the things that he did. And so that's the attitude that I'm taking. I want to show black composers. I am.
Why not?
Yes, but I want to show it also not in exclusivity. I want to show it right next to a composer who is white or a woman composer to show all of their worth in an equal way, and a way that they can coexist together, even on one program. And I think that that's more than a curiosity, but that's something that people will take a hold of and identify. Like somebody in the audience will identify with some piece on the program and also think, oh my God, this piece is just as good as that piece. Or, I find myself, see myself in this piece because it's a woman composer, or I see myself in it because it's a black composer, or something like that, that somebody can take home with them. I try to make a
Hmm.
balance of curiosity, education, um, many factors to make people want to come back. I want to educate people. I want to teach people. I don't want to teach people a lesson.
Well, let's speak about education. Now, as I said when we started, I thought you were from France, but you're actually from Chicago, right?
I am from Chicago.
So, how did you get from Chicago to New York to Europe? How did you decide to become a conductor? Because I read your bio. It says you were a protege pianist.
Mhm.
Um, Not everyone wants to be out front and have that responsibility. So, can you give us a little uh, description or narrative on that trajectory? I like to use that word from your beginnings. Like
Wow, we're going back there, but I
we're
came
going
to
back
New
there.
York by bus. Yes, by
Greyhound,
bus.
Greyhound, or what was that other
It
one?
was probably Greyhound, but I came by bus, and I think I even had a transfer at some point. But I came by bus. I went to the place. Came to New York because I was offered the most amount of scholarship money, and dormitory and things like that. For me, it was a little bit of an escape from Chicago.
Mm.
I was very popular. I was on a show called Challenge of the Mind with Brian Gumbel. I think he's still alive, but this was a long time ago where, Oprah Winfrey was called Oprah. She's not called Oprah. She was just called Oprah Winfrey. She had her roots in Chicago. Vernon Jarrett, and also Mayor Harry Washington, who was my sponsor. That's how I got the key to the city because he
Wow.
loved me. Oh, he absolutely loved me, and he was my sponsor, my major sponsor. And when he died, I knew that was a sign. I took it as a sign that I had, it was time for me to leave anyway. I was finishing high school, but I didn't have that support. I was offered to go to the conservatory, the Milan Conservatory. They had auditions in Chicago, lots of places, but I could not financially, growing up on the west side of Chicago, go across to Europe. It was scary. I tried every avenue I could, but I wound up going to New York, and I'm glad I did. I think I got a in most cases, a quality education. And but I always had a dream to go to Europe. I thought, that was the thing to do. That's what Josephine Baker did. That's what Dean Dixon did. And I thought, it was a fantasy,
So
but I
you had already
never,
heard of Dean Dixon by that point.
yes, I
Uh-huh.
was a library rat. Everybody, a shout out to the Chicago Public Library. And they were my mentors. I call them the library ladies. And they took an interest because I did not have a piano at the time. My my teacher let me practice in her basement on a green piano that was painted green piano. So I'd go there, and the other days I would go to the Chicago Public Library where they had like a 1 hour rule. But the library ladies let me stay there for a long
Wait a
time.
minute, there was a piano in the
They
library?
have pianos in the library. They had studios in the library at the
Get
cultural center.
out.
And
Wow.
they let me stay there, and they were interested in me, and because I performed at the hall there, and so they knew me, and they were black ladies, and they were like my aunties, and they also introduced me to stuff, and the librarians of the librarians, have you heard this? Have you listened to this? People check out this a lot, and so I learned an awful lot of repertoire from recommendation and talked about it with them. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So that was just like a gift that kept on giving. And as I said, that's how I learned a lot about the repertoire. I learned so much about different pianists. So when I went finally to Manhattan School of Music, I didn't have to take any of those courses. I mean, you could just drop the needle and I could tell you what it is. I still have this ability. And I had read things, it's like about Messiaen. Actually, I actually had a chance to meet Olivier Messiaen when
Oh
France was
my
at
gosh.
Fontainebleau. I had a full scholarship to Fontainebleau where Bernstein and Copland and everybody went, and Quincy Jones too. And but I knew things like, not only about Olivier Messiaen, but I knew basically about his books, The Technique of My Musical Language, and the books written about him because they were like, "Well, you heard it. What did you think? Oh, you need to read this. Oh, we have a translation of that just came in," and I would flip through it and read it. So I learned a lot of things. So we had a teacher at the Manhattan School of Music, I should just say Manhattan School of Music, that wanted to test me on my knowledge. Turned out I knew more about the subject than he did. And I'm like, how are you going to test me on Messiaen when I, was in France at Fontainebleau, one of the youngest people that actually got a chance to go there. And studied with Madame Duha, who had studied with Messiaen and all these people. And I had actually got a chance to study with Gabby Casadasu of, Robert and Gabby Casadasu, who studied with Ravel. So you're going to test me on this one because you want me to pay this money. And I'm like, I'm not paying this money because I don't need this. And he tried to test me, and it turned out I knew much more about it than he did, and that was a little wrong person because I found a lot of things that most people think when you are of color that you don't know as much as they do. But
You know, conservatory can be challenging in many ways, and it's unfortunate that what is that line at the end of Maya Angelou's poem, that you would deny yourself the pleasure of my company. And we have to understand it's not us. It's not us. We as creative people, we have a gift that has been gifted to us from whomever you believe, the higher power, the great spirit, whomever, and it is for us to use it as best as we can.
Mhm,
And sometimes we will meet people who are not as developed,
mhm,
or they're frustrated because they didn't feel their careers got to where they wanted them to be, or they have just preconceived ideas about you being in a place that they may think that you're taking their place.
mhm,
But I think for each of us as creatives, we are ordained in a way for what we're able to do. And
mhm,
so you have I just we've had lunch together before, we've chatted, but I'm finding out so many things about you today that I did not know, that are such so wonderful. Those the library ladies and all of this preparation, and that's part of that I always feel it's a spiritual intervention that's happening in a positive way.
Mhm.
Now, I would like to talk about, because we just have a few more minutes, I think, I would like to talk about your future plans. Are you going to do the Mahogany Festival again? What's happening
Um,
in Guadeloupe
wow.
and things like that?
You always have a two or three-fold questions.
I can't help it. I'm a
So
Gemini.
I have
What
to
can I
like think
say?
about it. Well, the Mahogany Festival, I would love to do again. It would be wonderful. It was spearheaded, um, by the chancellor there, Antonio, and he. I hope that he would see it as a great thing to do that. Or I would love to work more with the Symphony in C. I think that was a great opportunity to work with them. And who knows? They might be looking for a new director in the next year. So
That was my next question. Are you on faculty there?
no, I'm not.
They would
I
they
was on
need to they
temporary
did
faculty.
they need to snatch you up quickly because I'm
There's
sure you're
nothing
going to
for
be
me to
in
really do
much
there
demand.
because the director of the Symphony in C is already there, and she's there for
Oops.
another year. The chancellor has put in a good word for me, and everybody loves me there, Antonio Tillis, and he's a wonderful visionary, and just a wonderful visionary. So I'd love to be back, but that really depends on them.
Yeah.
But the idea and the whole Festival Mahogany is actually owned by me and also the organization which I created called Artist World. So we
Artist
brought
world.
Artist World, and it's a group of artists that are basically supporting artists. We consult artists and we consult arts organizations. And Rutgers University was one of our first clients,
Ah.
and we
How long has
consult
that been in existence?
for a year. So it was one of those ideas that I had that resurfaced. And when Rutgers took on this idea, when I pitched it to them, we had to become nonprofit really fast.
So 501c3.
We have 501(c)(3) and the
Mm-hmm.
whole nine yards.
Wonderful.
And I pretty much grabbed two of my most strongest and respected colleagues because I thought, either one of us could do everything we need to do that, but the three of us together would be unstoppable, and we kind of proved it. We threw that together and all the aspects of it in record time, and was able to negotiate a great deal
Hmm.
with Rutgers and the chancellor, and it went off just the way we imagined it.
Well, this goes back to what you were talking about entrepreneurship, which I think is so important for musicians today. Um, let's get back to that because I want to hear about your plans for your other festivals. But let's get back to entrepreneurship before we part today.
Mhm.
So, with
Well,
Havana and with Guadalupe, what are your plans for those
Guadalupe
festivals?
coming November 15th to 23 in Guadalupe. It is the 208th anniversary of Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint George, and it will be spectacular. They say
Oh, I
every
wish I
time,
could go.
yeah, they say if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, and every time we're getting better. And this time we're introducing the inaugural Joseph Boulogne International Violin Competition, which is going to bring contestants from all over the world, and we have a star-studded array of judges from China, Poland, Russia, Bulgaria, and we have so they're coming there, and these wonderful judges, and also Germany, they're coming, and so the head of the Beijing Conservatory, the violin department, is coming to Guadeloupe, this little island in the middle of the Atlantic. They're all going to
So
concur.
again, let's get those dates clear. Give me the dates
November
again.
15th through 23rd.
Through the 23rd,
Yes,
International Violin Competition. And is
yes.
it going to be in Pointe-à-Pitre?
And it's going to be, well, pretty much, a lot of it's going to be in Pointe-à-Pitre, which is the capital, but at the Memorial Act, and that's going to be great because we have two great people. The new directrice, Isabel Vetrice, is backing us. She was working as a liaison between the festival and the region, which is the government, and so she was our our go-to person. She implemented everything we told her to, anything that we needed. And then she, of course, because she was too good, or she was just the right amount of good, she inherited the Memorial Act, which is one of the biggest museums in the world, and it's huge structure. It was inaugurated with Jesse Jackson came there when it was first opened, and it's a museum dedicated to the memorial of slavery and things like that. And it's a wonderful, 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 wonderful venue. And with under her direction, I'm sure it's just gonna
Mhm.
flourish.
I'm
So
going to ask you for that website later so I can put that up at the end
yeah.
of our interview.
Mhm.
Um, oh my gosh, that is so wonderful. So, listen, I kudos,
Well,
applause,
let's see
applausing.
if it keeps going, if my luck keeps going well. This is going to be really something. There is no other international competition in the world dedicated to a person of color, and this is something that's going to be on the level of the Paganini competition, the Tchaikovsky competition, and we hope it's going to attract that kind of talent. We've already had some inquiries, and this is and but for me, it was not about the competition. For me, it is about people knowing the life and music of Joseph Chevalier de Saint George. And this way I've touched already, I'm sure, thousands.
Are you writing a book by any chance?
I am writing a book.
Okay.
And I'm trying to finish it. It should be a second book, but I want to write a book. I'm about the one that I've started already is a book on Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint George. And that's the first book because, being an authority, which I never planned in my life to be an authority on anything, um, in that sense, but I seem to be through experience, I've had to edit works of his for the festival, many works
Mm-hmm.
of his, and had to seek them out, find out the history behind them, find out the history behind, and every time you turn up another thing. And so far, this collection of knowledge has put me well above the rest of the people who don't know anything about Central. So I'm often invited to do lectures and critiques and things like that. And so I've learned some things that are not in the very few books that are available, but I'm just still learning many things, and there's some things that have come to surface that I'm investigating before I complete my book, which
Mm-hmm.
probably will take me, if I'm lucky, a year. If I'm unlucky, 2 years.
Well, I'm hoping someone who can finance that so you can just devote your time to finishing your book with everything else that you're
It's so
doing.
hard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What about Havana? What's on the docket for the
I will be
programming?
returning to Havana next month. I have 2 concerts planned, one with the Montanzas Symphony Orchestra, and I will do a program of Mozart and Mendelssohn, his
Hmm.
40th symphony, Mozart's 40th symphony, and Mendelssohn's 4th symphony. So I'm doing that in Montanzas, which is very close to Varadero, which is the beach, the famous beach.
Take your sunscreen.
Yes, I've been there before. The sand is like baby powder. It's
Oh,
incredible.
uh-huh.
And then I will go and have a concert, go to Havana and have a concert with the Havana Lyceum Orchestra, where we do a little bit of a dedication to composers of Finland, northern composers, which I'll do an all Sibelius program. And that's one of 2 Sibelius programs where, in a way, we're honoring, it's called basically, the Aurelius Borealis, which is the Northern Lights. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing Sibelius Valse Triste, the Violin Concerto, and the Fifth Symphony. And so that will
Ah.
be done all next month, and then I'll give a master class in between time at the University of the Arts on
Well, I'm going to say I'm a fan. And if I ever win the lotto, I will be following you around the world. But for right now, I have to sit here in New York and just live vicariously through your posts on social media and reading about you in the news. Before we go, I want to talk about entrepreneurship because
Okay.
one of the things that has really illustrated the need for business skills, for being an entrepreneur, for knowing how to promote oneself, was the pandemic.
Hmm.
The pandemic, everything shut down.
Yes.
People were going online and even performing online and learning things that they didn't necessarily want to or had to do before. So out of this has come so many things, and you're speaking about your company now. Um, what do you think are your long-term goals for your 501c3? You said you do consulting. Is it to find underrepresented artists, who may be mid-career, or young artists like the young lady who played the Sanson cello concerto at the festival, Itafayo Ali? Did I say her name
Yes,
correctly?
that's correct.
Yes.
She's wonderful.
She is amazing. I saw a video of her when she was Junior Sphinx winner
Yes.
with this big bow in her hair,
Oh,
and
yes.
and I've been trying to catch up with her ever since.
Mm,
But it was just, those kinds of artists that have to work, that may be playing in a pit orchestra,
mhm.
might be singing in a church choir just to, make the rent money and stuff. How do you speak to them through your company?
Well, I've always, for a very long time, I should say now, maybe always been an entrepreneur at heart because many times you're not offered a spot at the table. And they said, when you're not offered a spot at the table, what do? You build your own. And that's what I've been doing for a long time. I just made it more formal these days. But it's always existed with the festival in Guadeloupe, the orchestras, Ensemble du Monde, Manhattan Virtuosi, all the things that I created. I've had to create because no one would give me a chance. They didn't want to. They didn't want to let you in. The gatekeepers that still exist today are prevalent. And as I said in the festival, I think in one of the lectures, no one can stop you from achieving your dreams except you. So I believe that, and that you can achieve your dreams. There'll be a lot of determinants, but you can. If you can figure a way through any puzzle. We are clever people,
Mhm.
and so that's where I come from, and that's the
So
status.
are you reaching out to artists, or are artists contacting you?
Artists are contacting me,
Hmm.
and we do a lot of things with like artists that are want to create their own CDs. They want to create their own series, and I've been around the block and back again, and I can share that between me and my two colleagues, which is Jemshet Terrell and Megan Sesma. We have been around the block more than once, and we see what a lot of people see, that a lot of people who are not the artists are controlling the lives of artists. They're collecting more money than artists. They're doing that, and you don't know where this money's going.
Okay, I have stories that I'll tell you off camera. I'm not going to do
Yeah.
that.
We don't know where this money's going. So at least now, if I'm in control of my own series or something like that, I know exactly where the money's going. And so we make sure we do that. We want to get paid. So often, it's kind of like having your candle burning from both ends. In some cases, with Festival Mahogany, I was the administrator, but on the other side, I was a performer. But I knew I had to do that, and that's why I had to grab my two most clever friends to with me because we have a lot of skills between the three of us, and so basically, so we thought we could do this for other people too.
And I would
Um,
say too, Marlon, it's not just about the economic side, which
mhm,
is always important.
mhm,
It's also about your artistic goals.
yes.
For example, as a singer, would I want to do another production of Porgy and Bess versus going to sing Leonora and La Favorita?
Mhm,
It gives you some choice, and it gives you variety, and it gives you possibilities that may be closed off to you if you're just waiting for someone to say, "Hey, I've got this contract here."
mhm,
Um, but the preparation is important. Do you speak to that
yeah,
with your artists as well? You
and
have
you can
to.
wait a long time for somebody to see your vision. You can wait a long time for somebody to open the door for you.
But you have
We're
to be ready when that door opens. That's
You
the main
always have
thing.
to be ready.
Yeah.
You can't get ready. You have to be ready. And
And you know who taught me that? If I can just digress a
is that
second, Tanya Leon.
oh Tanya Leon, yeah,
Tanya,
Auntie Tanya.
she wrote a piece for me actually
Hmm.
years ago. She came to my coachings to hear and study my voice before she. It's called To and Fro. I don't think I get the credit on the publishing thing, but it was set on me.
Hmm.
Um, but she said a lot of times kids will complain, oh, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, because of racism, da 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 da. She says it's because they have not been practicing. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't they weren't prepared. They weren't ready,
Mm-hmm.
and that statement drove home in my brain that regardless of whether you have a job or not, because for me it was a long time. I couldn't get arrested for singing in the car. Couldn't, but I
Mm-hmm.
kept practicing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things that the takeaways that from someone like Tanya Leon that I carried through. I'm sorry, you can hear the noise from outside. I carried through those lessons that you just in conversation that you pick up from people. So that contact when you were having those seminars, talking with you now, there may be some young person who watches this interview later that can take away some nuggets about what they need to do to prepare themselves. So, in conclusion, as we kind of wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to add at this moment about what you're doing or your reflections on art? Um, I do have one final question, though.
Yeah. I only have one thing
Yeah,
besides, is that, I always also believe that if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. As an artist, you have to always be pushing the boundaries of what you can do or what you think you can do, because we're sometimes just limited by our imaginations.
hmm.
And I always, if I've done something one way or did a symphony one way, I'm always thinking the next time, how can I make it better? How can I make myself better? And if you're not, it's not relevant anymore. And so that's why I always say if you're not getting better, you're getting worse because you're not challenging yourself. You're not trying to be all you can be.
My fifth grade teacher used to say, "Good, better, best. Never shall I rest until good is better and better is best."
That's fun.
My final question for you is, where do you think music is going to go in the next 10, 15 years? What are the things that we should think about in terms of new music? I'm giving you a multiple question again. I'm
Hmm.
sorry. Uh, what are your thoughts?
We can do this all night. Everyone says, the big thing is that classical music is dying. I think the people who are saying this are actually advocates of actually killing it. You can charge $500 for a Taylor Swift concert, and then you say a classical music concert is too expensive when it's only 35.
Yep.
Think about that. I think classical music is an art form. It sometimes, and well, I say most times, are a higher level of art than the pop music that's there. Not that it's better or worse in that sense of enjoyment. We enjoy lots of things in every place. Well, our type of music has its place, but it is a art. Classical music, it is an art forged in athleticism. It is an art forged in creativity. It is an art forged in endurance and fortitude and strength. And so it is worth saving, yes, and it is worth going on. Now, do my concerts, when I say that, are very clever and tricky in a format, because sometimes I'll do things that are like arranged with crossover, as they would say, arranged with pop music, arranged with folk things that I've specially done, especially in Guadeloupe. The major band out of there is called Kasaf. They're like national heroes in all of the Caribbean. They fill up
Is
the
that
stadium.
souk music?
Soca music. In their Caribbean music, and we did an arrangement of one of the Kasaf hits, and so it has its place. But classical music, above more other types of music, is rooted in the craft. And how I was able to do that is because I knew the craft. We know the craft of how to make things happen. And someone that just is, I feel the music I'm going to sing, don't know this, but then they have to pay people who actually do. So, all these engineers and all the people that make you sound like that, but there's
Auto
something
tune?
auto tune. There's something untruthful about that. you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so when you're singing, you sound like Carolyn. Okay, some other singer or who's in a pop industry when sing, they do not sound like themselves. They do not sound as good as the recordings they're making. So they don't do live performances. They do it because it's there's something unreal about it. Not to say it's bad or good. It's just something unreal. It can be creative. But when you have a classical education, you know how things work, how things really work. And that's really, I think, something that has the craftsmanship behind you to create more. I think your
Sorry, there was noise outside. I
mhm,
teach an introduction to world music class, and I try to impart to the students that it's okay to like what you like, but just like you go to a restaurant and you try different things on the menu,
mhm,
that you try some different things musically as well. And
mhm,
some of them get it because they have to go to live concerts and they'll come back and say, "Oh, I didn't think I was going to like it, but so
mhm,
there's this aha and excitement that they have, and not all of them are 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. I have some older students as well. But what you're saying is, what I say to them is it broadens your palette.
yes,
We speak of music in colors,
mhm,
so it broadens the colors and the timbres that you have. And then I make them listen to some of the things where it's just a loop on a beat, what they call beats now,
mhm,
the composed music to
mhm,
hip hop music.
mhm,
And I'll play something and then play something else, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's more complex. That has more layers to
yes.
it." One of them that I start out with is Missy Elliott, "Get Your Freak On."
Oh, get your freak ons. Da,
Hmm.
da, da, da,
Because
da.
dum ba da 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 dum, which is he recreated the fellow who did that beat. He had been in India. He had heard the tabla drums, and
Mhm,
he recreated the sound of the tabla drums,
mhm,
tablas, we might say.
yes.
And so I think that's so important now, not just for the art and the craft, but for the humanity, that you can see there's more than what's being sold to you
Yes.
in a tight little package. Because I also make them disconnect from the videos so they just listen. Because
Mhm,
sometimes the production in the video is much more extravagant and
mhm,
expenses put into it than the music.
yeah.
So I'll probably cut that part out. But
Well, I taught a course I was teaching, which I frequently dip into the university teaching genre. And one of my favorite courses actually is music appreciation with a side bit of history I put in there.
oh yeah,
Not people listen to things and they're like, oh, I don't like this. Or I'm like, how many people here? And the first question I asked, how many people here love classical music or like classical music? No hands were on it. I said, you're all liars. Now, how many people listen to classical music? Nobody's raising their hand. You're all liars because you listen to classical music 90% of the time. You just don't know you do.
hmm,
I'm like, how many people watch TMZ? Oh, love that show. 90% of over 90% of the class raise their hand. Watch TMZ every day. The blurb. I say, all the music that they use on TMZ are in the public domain, and they're using music, classical music, all the things that you think are effects. So you remember every bus you go on, you know what I mean, has a snippet. Every time you go in an elevator. So you listen really technically to classical music all the time. You've just so used to it that you don't realize that that's what you're listening to. And so I brought them to the attention. I made them the first assignment. I said, take a real listen to the shows that you are watching and tell me which shows have classical music in it if you're really listening to it. And I got all kinds of responses from that. I'm like, oh my God, I never realized it was in that too. And you liked it too, because of course it portrayed something, a feeling, emotion, a scenery. You know what I mean?
the
That you,
films, the commercials,
the
yeah,
films,
all
the
of that, yeah,
commercials, they had
yeah.
so many things, all kinds of car commercials. And I said, so you see that you're actually listening to classical music all the time. And so you love it. And you listen to it all the time. And now let's find out ways that you can actually identify it or use it to your advantage in life. even though you're not, some of you are not musicians. And
What
by the time I finished, they could tell like different periods. They could tell different genres. Sometimes they could even tell different composers by the time I was finished.
well, I'll put on a Baroque piece and just like just popping off and keeping the beat, you know. So, Marlon, in our closing moment, what is one of your future goals that you can talk about?
Well, one of my future goals is coming about. I get to return, as they say, the prodigal son gets to return back to their place of origin. I'm going to Chicago in this summer, and I'm conducting the Chicago Summer Opera in a production of Ariadne of Naxos, actually two productions. And so I was invited to do that this summer, and that's where I will be for the months of July and August. So for about a little over a month, where they prepare and then they're going to do the production. So I'm really looking forward to that because I have not literally given a performance there since I left high school. So
Well, we're going to let people in Chicago know that you're on the way. And as I said
I'm
before,
back.
yes, if I win the lotto, I'll be in Guadeloupe. But
You don't have to
Marlon,
win a lotto to be in Guadeloupe. You're invited to come to Guadeloupe. Come to Guadeloupe.
it's a beautiful place. You know, I've been there.
You will be
And
welcome.
yeah. So Marlon, thank you so much for talking and sharing the story of your life and your work with me today. And I'll be putting up those websites where people can access information about the festival in Guadeloupe and in Chicago, the opera coming this summer. And we look forward to seeing that book soon. And it's been really, really a great pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you for having me.